Hello everyone, this is James Shore with another how-to video. I'm recording this on June 29th, 2015. In this chapter, we are working on setting up a reproducible build. We want, if our code works on our machine, we want it to work on every development machine on our team. And that's what a reproducible build is all about. In the last episode, we just finished getting Jake, our build tool, set up in our Git repository so that we can run our build on every machine. So we don't have to do any sort of special installation. We can just type node modules bin Jake and it will run and our build will say that it worked. Same thing here on our Windows machine. If we say node modules / bin Jake, our build will run. Now, this is a little bit clunky. We don't want to be running node modules .bin / Jake every single time. So this is where shell scripting comes in. Shell scripting is nothing more and nothing less than a little programming language that pretends it's typing in the command window, in your command shell. And although the basic concept is the same, it is different on Windows and Mac or Unix, so I'm going to show you for both of those. To start out with, though, let's go ahead and look at the Unix way of doing it. Like I said, this is just a little programming language. It is a lot like typing directly into the command window, except that it adds in some special constructs for looping and other programming type of things. So I'm going to make a file called jake.sh. On Unix and Mac, the .sh is not required, but it is a convention. So I'll create that file. This is our shell script file. I'm going to ignore the plugins for now. You are welcome to add them. And then anything we type in here will actually just run on the command line as if we had typed them on the command line. So all we need to do in order to automate our command is type, well, exactly this into our shell script, save it, and there we go, we're done. Now to run it, if we look, we see that we have jake.sh. See all these funny, screwy things over here? These are file permissions. You can only see them when you do the long form. If you just do an ls, you won't see them. But if you do the long form, you'll see that there's this first dash, which we're going to ignore, then 3 sets of permissions. This says that our files are read and writable by us, readable by our group, and readable by anyone with access to this machine. What we want to do, and that is true for all these non-directory files, including our new jake.sh. So if we try to run that jake.sh like this, that's how you run a shell script in Mac and Unix, it's going to say permission denied because it's not executable. There's no X permission on jake.sh. So the way we fix that, again on Unix and Mac, is by saying change modifiers, chmod, plus X, add the execute permission to jake.sh. And now if we do an ls-s-la, we can see that now execute permissions have been added for us, for our group, and for anybody who has access to this computer for jake.sh. So now when we type jake.sh, well, for one, the tab completion now works, and for 2, we can run it, and it runs our script for us. And now it's much easier for us to run our build, and that was the goal. On Windows, it's somewhat easier. You want to create a batch file or command file. That is a file with the .cmd extension. You will also see a .bat extension. They're pretty much identical for anything that you're likely to care about. And it's the same deal. Anything that you want to be typed at the command line, just put it in here, 1 per line, it'll be run for you. So we just need to take our node modules /bin / Jake, again with backslashes. Now, oops, that didn't come over. I must not have copied it correctly. Let's try that again. I think the Windows command prompt, you have to press enter. And that's only if you have in your properties, if you have quick edit mode set up, you can press enter to copy. Otherwise, I think you have to right click and say copy. I don't know, something like that. Anyway, let's bring this in, paste that in. There we go. There's our backslashes. Would have been faster just to type in it, I think. Anyway, if I save it, we don't have to go through all the rigmarole that we did on Unix and Mac. We can just type Jake. You don't even have to type ./ or .cmd. It should just work. And there you go. Now, one thing you'll notice about the Windows version is it actually echoes out everything that's in the file. So you'll see that. That's either nice or ugly, depending on your point of view. I think it's kind of ugly. Okay, let's go ahead and check this in. I'm going to go ahead and make that a .cmd file over here so we can check it all in with one commit. So I'm going to do that real quick. Okay, so we have set up our convenience script for running Jake. Now, there's a little problem with what we've built here so far, and that is we can run Jake, and that's great. But remember, Jake has command line processing. We can do things like say help, and it will give us help. Won't it? Hello? What's happening here is that we have told right here in our command prompt, we're saying run node module /bin/Jake, and we're not saying run help. So it's not running --help. It's ignoring all of our command parameters. So what we want to do is pass those command parameters through to Jake. And the way you do that is on Unix, you type $, and that says pass everything through. And on Windows, you type %, and that means, again, pass any command line arguments through. And now that we've done that, Jake-help will actually work. Jake-t will actually work. So that is the correct version of the build script. I'm going to go ahead and modify our previous commit with the -amend option to take that into account. This is something that you can do in Git. If you find a small mistake in a commit you just made, you can amend that previous commit. This is something to use cautiously. You don't want to ever use it after you've shared your files with other people, but you can do it if you catch your mistake right away. On Unix and Mac, this will probably bring up Vim. To save your changes, you're going to press Shift-ZZ or :W, one of the two. I use Shift-ZZ. That saves out all the changes. If you want to change the information, you can use C to rewrite, and then escape to get back out of insert mode, and then again Shift-ZZ to change. I'm going to use U here to undo. Vim, by the way, is just a screwy editor. It's something that I learned in college and have sort of kept up with, and people love it because you can keep your hands on the keyboard and never use the mouse. How to use Vim is out of scope for the rest of this series, so if you're interested in it, go ahead and Google it. There's lots and lots of tutorials online about how to use Vim. The other option is you could just type in the message here again, and then you won't get Vim. But I like leaving that out so I can just edit my existing command or my existing message here. All right. So there we've committed our changes. Remember what we're doing here is we've just fixed the fact that we weren't passing command line parameters through. Okay, that is the basics of shell scripting, but there's a few things that we're going to want to do in order to make it better. First, let's make sure that this command we checked in actually works on Windows. Again, the way you share your checked in files with others is going to vary depending on your project. So talk to your team members about how they like to do it. But here I've got it set up so I can do a git pull. It is complaining that we're going to have some overwritten files because remember we made our own jake.cmd here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. The way you do that on Windows is with the del, delete command. And now I should be able to pull. There we go. So let's make sure Jake works on Windows, and yes, everything's working. Our commands are being passed through. Great. There's a few, this is the basics. Now there's something that you should add to every Unix or Mac command script, shell script, and that's something called a shebang. It looks like this, a hash sign and then an exclamation mark. Some people call this hash, some people call this bang, so it's called shebang. This tells Unix which command processor to use when it runs your shell script. And by default, people use /bin/sh. This is the built-in command prompt for Unix. The reason you want to do this is you might actually be using a different command prompt. Unix, and that includes the Mac, has multiple command prompts available to you, multiple shells that you can use. What's running here in the command prompt is called a shell. And there's lots of different ones, and they will have different ways of running commands. So what this does is this says, use this command prompt, this shell that we know how it works, that will understand things like $, so that even if you are running some screwy command shell that's totally different and doesn't work in the same way, this will run something that still knows how to read this. So that's a bit of hygiene for Unix and Mac command prompts. There's a similar bit of hygiene that's less important that I often like to include in my Windows command prompts, and that is @echo_off. Remember, by default, Windows will type out every single line onto the command window so you can see it, like you can see right here. And although that might be useful for debugging, I find that it's kind of ugly. So @off says turn that off, and putting the @ sign in front says don't even echo the @off command. So let's go ahead and save that, and I'll go ahead and check this in. First, let's make sure it works. It works here, good. Check that in. That's a bit of build script hygiene, and let's get it over here and make sure everything's working here. So now that I've got that @off, you shouldn't see on Windows the command show up. So if I type Jake, yeah, it just runs and says build OK. Nice and clean. So now we've got a nice command prompt that will run our build for us. We're not quite done yet though, because remember how on Windows, when we first ran Jake, this is from the last episode, when we first ran Jake, it didn't run. That was because we hadn't run npm rebuild. And we can simulate that here. Let's go ahead and look at our status. We can simulate that by resetting to a clean repository. And the way we do that is by typing git clean-fdx. That means we really want to run it. F for force, otherwise git clean doesn't do anything. D for delete all directories, and X for delete all untracked files. If I do that, you'll see that all of our untracked files have gone away. And then, because for some reason we've got changed files in here, we also need to do git reset hard. This says take any changes that are in the local tree and reset them to the exact same state as they were in our last commit. And now if we do a git status, we can see everything's clean. So this is back to the state we were in, where we are pristine and clean, and this is where we were at when we ran Jake for the first time on Windows. Now, if we run Jake again, what happens? It says that node modules bin Jake is not recognized, and that's because we have to run npm rebuild first. So it'd be nice if our build script did that for us. Before we do that, though, I want you to notice something. If I do an npm rebuild and then a git status, there's all this crap in here. Untracked files, changed files. What's going on? Well, what's happened here is I made a mistake in the last episode. When we were ignoring build artifacts, I forgot to ignore the .bin directory in node modules. Node modules, when it installs something, will create a link to the thing it's installed in the .bin directory, and it will do that recursively down through all the different directories that have executable code. So we need to ignore all these .bin files. So I'm going to come back to our git ignore here. What we're going to do is we're going to put in a comment. This is for node, or really npm. We're going to say in node modules, and all possible subdirectories of node modules, ignore the .bin directory, like that. And then I'm also going to go through and delete this .bin and this .bin here. Those were accidentally checked in. We don't want them. Now, if I'd left them in, it wouldn't be that big of a deal, but this way our repository will stay nice and clean, and we won't get those weird errors that we got, or those weird changes that we got on our Windows machine. So I've changed that. I'm going to go ahead and add these changes and commit them. We have removed and ignored npm's .bin directories. So now if I go back to here, clean everything, reset, this two sequence of commands, by the way, is very useful for getting back to a clean repository, but do be careful with it. It will wipe out any changes that you haven't checked in. So that is something to be careful with. So if I do a git pull, that gets the updated .gitignore. And now when we do an npm rebuild, there's no changes that need to be checked in because they have all been ignored. If I run Jake, it builds. But again, if I clean all of our untracked files, we get a failure. It cannot find the path specified. So we need to modify our build script to automatically do the rebuild for us. Now remember, the shell script just runs the commands we do. So we can actually put npm rebuild here right at the top. And same thing for our Jake command. We can say npm rebuild right at the top. And now when we run our Jake script, it's going to do our rebuild for us. Very nice. In fact, it might be nice for us to write out that we are doing the rebuild. And the command for that is echo. So we're going to say echo building npm modules. And actually, I don't think we put quotes around it. I think just doing that will give us the right answer. Yeah, so there we go. Building npm modules. Very nice. Let's do the same thing here. It's the same on Windows. Windows shell scripting or batch files are somewhat similar to Unix, but not exactly. So that's nice. Problem is, it's kind of slow, isn't it? Now we're building the npm modules every single time, and we really don't need to do that. So let's add an if statement that says only rebuild the modules if this file doesn't exist. The way you do that in Unix is kind of screwy. This is a test. This says check to see if something is true. And then we'll say, and if it is, then do this. And if that's also true, then do that. And I think here we do want to put the quotes around it. And the test is to say, if a file exists, we'll say node modules /bin/jake. Now that will say, if the file exists, then do this, and then do that. What we want to do here is actually say, if the file doesn't exist, do this, and then that. That's shell scripting for you. It's kind of bizarre. And honestly, I don't know exactly why this is the syntax. I don't know the ins and outs of shell scripting that much. When I need to know how to do something in a shell script, I just Google it. I do know, though, however, that you need to put these spaces in. So if I do this now, we should see that our npm rebuild doesn't run unless we delete the node modules bin directory, which is done with rm-rf, remove everything in the node modules bin directory recursively. So that means all the files and all the directories. And don't ask me questions, just do it. -rf is dangerous. Be careful with it. But if I do that, you'll see that my bin directory disappears when I come back. It will update and see that it's disappeared. And now it should say building npm modules. Beautiful. Now we have a proper one-button build. Let's do the same thing for our command, for our batch file. In batch, what you can say is if exist, it's a little cleaner, node modules bin jake go to, okay, it's not quite as clean as I'd like, run jake. So here we'll say run jake. So it's a good old-fashioned go-to, and that will skip over the building npm modules and the npm rebuild and just run jake. Now I hope I did that right. Let's go ahead and check it in. Come over here, do a git pull. And Jake, looks like it worked. No, it doesn't look like it worked. Look at that. When we said npm rebuild, it didn't do the Jake. So if I say get clean ftx and then Jake, it's not going to say build OK. That's because I made a mistake, a very common mistake to make in a batch file. I forgot to say call. When you run a command in a batch file, if that command is also a batch file, but only if it's a batch file, and you don't use call, it will abort the script. That will be the last command that runs. So you should put call before all your commands in a batch file. And I always forget about that little detail. And it's screwy, and that's Windows for you. Of course, it's not like Unix is any better. This is, I would say, even more screwy. So I guess that's just programming for you. Let's go ahead and check that in. We cannot do a commit amend here because we have transferred the files to somebody else. You cannot amend a commit you've sent to somebody else. If you do, it will cause all kinds of fear and loathing and pain. So don't do that. Okay, so we fixed our build script on Windows. It should run even on a rebuild. Let's go ahead and pull those changes down. Check them out. And it's looking good so far. Did we fix it? It builds and then it runs. Perfect. Our build is okay. So now we have a one-button reproducible build. Somebody comes along, checks out the code for the very first time, runs Jake, and it will just automatically work no matter what machine they are on. This is what a good reproducible build looks like. It just works. Off camera, I'm going to go ahead and update our README. There is one thing left for us to do for us to truly have a reproducible build, and that is to deal with another kind of dependency. We will deal with that in the next episode. For now, as your exercise for this episode, I'd like you to go ahead and set up your shell script so that you have a true one-button build. And after you've checked it in, try cleaning things, making sure it works in that case too. Do remember, however, that if you're going to use git clean or git reset, it does erase your changes, so be sure to check them in before you try that. All right, that is it for this time. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.